Let's join together in prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, הפוך בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה. ידעי די 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 די, ידעי די 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 די, ידעי די 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 די, ידעי די די די. So as I mentioned before, this year we're going to be kind of looking at the Torah through the lens of this book, the Musar Torah Commentary, which was edited by Barry Block and just came out last year. And basically in it, for every single Torah portion, it has a short, like 5 pages or so, I think today's was, a short little commentary to bring different insights into our discussion. And the focus of this particular one was on the idea of humility and how it is reflected throughout Bereishit, throughout this first Torah portion of the year. So let me share my screen. My computer has a mind of its own. Okay, here we go. Every time I share something else, a new screen pops up. And so there we go. I have to close it in order to do this. So what I did is I took little snippets from the chapter on Bereishit and Anavah, this idea of humility. And I interspersed it with some other texts. Thank you, Bonnie, for throwing that in. A little description of what Musar is all about. Thank you. And I know we can have many more conversations about that kind of interspersed in there. But essentially, like this whole idea of Musar, it's this spiritual practice, because throughout the High Holy Days, what are we doing? We're doing cheshbon hanefesh. We're looking within ourselves. We're thinking about, how am I living my life truthfully? Not the story that I tell myself, but how am I really living my life? Are the ways in which I'm acting in this world, is it consistent with my values? Are there things that maybe are off balance? Do I find myself getting angry too easy or being impatient? Do I find myself being overly generous or not generous enough? It's where do I fall, and how do I create the balance so that I'm kind of in line with where I want to be? And so each week there's different rabbis who write a commentary where they focus on one specific kind of attribute of the self. So this one just happens to be on humility, and it seems like a pretty good place to start. Of course, when we think about Genesis, we think about the creation of the world, we think about the creation of all the creatures, and we also think about the creation of human beings. So does anyone want to just read these first couple of verses here from Genesis?
I'll do it.
Thanks, Larry.
And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living thing.
Thank you. So when you read these texts, what does that bring up for you?
Well, let's see. For me, it's always that we were created in the image of God, and we were given life by the breath of God. He breathed into us the breath of life, as it says, Nishmat Chaim. the breath of life. Very, very important words, only used in Genesis.
It also reminds me of morning blessings when we say Elohai Neshama Shenatatabi, the soul you have given me is pure. So when we wake up in the morning, our soul is returning to us, and it's like we're breathing in that breath of life each morning.
It's beautiful.
It also, I always love that God created male and female in the same move or at the same time. And the other is, it doesn't say God created Jewish men and women. It says God created mankind, male and female.
So we have kind of like an equal footing. We have this kind of spiritual idea of God breathing life into us, of our soul returning to us. Anything else that comes up? Yeah.
I think that knowing that the beginning part is where he made everything else first, I always find that like it's truly humbling and an act of humility is that he made us last. Like he made us last. Like for one, that's great. Like he made it as a gift for us. But also I think he didn't make us on day 4. I think because we would have messed up day 5 and 6. You know what I mean? Like mankind would have been like, oh, why are you making trees like that? You should just chop them already down for it. Whatever, you know, like we were so self-absorbed that I think he had to make us last. And that's like real humility. Like, okay, like he knows we would have messed things up because we do. That's what we do. We're human. So anyway, that's what I liked about it so far.
Well said.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting thought. That the creation of the last day, right? The thing about these verses is that they could so easily be read in different ways, depending on our perspective. They could be read as like, well, God created us in God's image. So clearly we're really special, right? Like we should be arrogant. We should take control of everything because God made us. God was just practicing on everyone else, right? Like we're the real deal. You could view it that way, or you can view it from this place of humility. And the verses don't change, but perhaps we change in how it is that we see it and how we react to it. And I think that's the point of all of this.
I believe later in it mentions, I don't know the exact quote, but God even says that like all of it is for yours to be taken care of. I don't know the exact quote. And you know, you can also see it as an example, see it as a purpose of trying to give us a template of like what we're striving to maintain and balance, you know, so we don't have to imagine for ourselves or try to think that we should create something else.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
I also think that you can see that is if we extend it out to ourselves, that God blew a little bit of himself into every single person when they were born. And it's there, whether or not we think it's there, whether or not we use that, expand it, or don't know about it, or don't believe it, that this would indicate, and man became a living being. Well, was that a one-shot deal, or is that everyone?
Yeah. It relates a lot to the High Holy Days, doesn't it? Because like around the High Holy Days, we have like this whole idea, they're the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe or the days of fear, because fear and awe are the same thing. And very often people say, I don't understand that fear thing. What is the fear all about? But it relates to humility. It primarily relates to humility. It's saying, I am so small in this vast universe, right? And yet my actions can have enormous consequences. So I want us to turn, and I took a few different kind of texts from the book to intersperse things. This is the first of them, just introducing Anavah. Would anyone like to read this?
You want to read it?
I can read it.
Thank you, Ray.
Anavah, humility, Shabbat as a return to our authentic selves by Rabbi Michelle Perlman and Rabbi Sharon Mars in Musar Torah commentary. Just as the Torah begins with Parashat Bereishit, Musar practice begins with the Meda of Anavah. All other midot are accessed through this core character trait. The Meda of Anavah is essential for living with integrity. When we think of humility, we may imagine someone who is the picture of modesty and meekness. However, in Musar, humility is not defined as being so humble that you disappear. Rather, it is about having all of your character traits in balance so that the inner light of the soul shines pure and clear as originally intended. As Musar teacher Alan Marinis puts it, being humble doesn't mean being nobody. It just means being no more of a somebody than you ought to be.
Isn't that last quote awesome? So in case you had a question about what a midah is, because I realized I should have defined that before reading this, a midah is, Bonnie, do you have a ready to go kind of, I'm trying to figure out, it's very simple,
Yes.
but
I have my elevator talk about what Musar is. A midah is a character trait.
there we go.
That's all it is. Like when we're doing Heshbon HaNefesh, we're evaluating our character traits. And an example of a character trait, other than humility, you can think about, I think I've shared this about generosity. You don't want to give away all your money, and you also don't want to be a Scrooge, so you have to find the balance. Or another character trait is patience, that we get to look at how impatience shows up. Like if we're standing in line someplace and we're really annoyed, you can either, be annoyed, or you can change your behavior and look around and maybe say hello to somebody. And so you work at not being with patience. It's like, slow to anger. You don't want to get to the place of anger. You want to get to a place of equanimity. So there are hundreds of character traits, and Anavah, humility, is the one that the Musar teachers say to begin with. So perfect that it's at the beginning. But that's it. Okay.
Thank you. So just any other comments based on this kind of beginning text?
I do on it being, since it's can it also can be character defects, or does this have to be character only to the good? You know what I mean? Because I think sometimes, a lot of times, I'm working on is the bad character defects.
Yeah,
I
Frank.
guess being impatient, would be that, like just making sure I do keep patience, making sure I remember that even the people in front of me are children of God, and they deserve my kindness, not to be like, come on,
Yeah.
if they make a mistake. Like, I think that, because I had to work on a lot on that, because I think the world is dumb sometimes. Oh my God, are these all against me today? And so to kind of look back and just go, they're all children of God going through their own story today. Let me just step back from that. I think is something that I kind of take from the humility part.
Yeah, but Frank, according to Musar, my understanding is there's no such thing as a bad character trait. Like we all have all of them. The problem is when they get out of balance. Okay. And that's where we're quicker to anger. We're, and truthfully, if we go in either direction, it can be problematic for our soul and for the way in which we act in the world. So the goal is to try to find that balance, right, Bonnie? I'm not.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I've worked with a lot of people in 12-step programs who work on their 4th step inventory, which is basically Heshbon HaNefesh. And I like to say that from a Jewish perspective, it's not a defect. It's just out of balance. And with humility, you don't want to get too puffed up. Like I'm working really hard to stay back here, but you don't want to get too puffed up, but you also don't want to be a doormat. So it's about finding the right balance.
That's what I want to say. I'm sorry, the people pleaser, like being a people pleaser. Like I don't want to be that guy neither. I don't want to run around there was a guy the other day pushing a crackhead, sorry, that's what he was. He was pushing a car like a mile up the road. I have a bad knee. He asked for my help. I remember going, that would be people pleasing stuff. Like, I can't help you, right? Like, to know my ins and outs, I think too, is to not run and be like, oh, I got to help this person, you know? And actually I did talk to him kindly, and the best thing I could do, but I wasn't going to help him push a car a mile up the road. You know what I mean? So anyway, sorry. Just not being a people pleaser is good too.
The other part that really appeals to me is that the Meda of humility is essential for living with integrity. That really struck me. It talks about balance. It talks about being true to yourself. You live with integrity when you live in balance and you're humble about it. So it's the center of everything, integrity and humility.
I just have a quick comment. If ever we ever needed a little bit of this, or a lot of it, in fact, after a year of being more in this pandemic, the kinds of things that are being exhibited today by people who have no patience on airplanes and fights, and now here it's in restaurants, and they're even attacking nurses and doctors. You know, it's over the top in the wrong direction. So we need some balance. I don't know how we work to get it in our community.
Yeah, but perhaps we start with humility. There was now I'm forgetting who the rabbi is, but I'm rereading for the third time Alan Marinis's book, Everyday Holiness. And in it, he tells the story of a rabbi who wanted to try to make a difference in the world. And so he went to people in the world and he was trying to get them to change their ways, right? And to find more peace in the world. And he found that he was wholly unsuccessful in doing so. So what did he do? He turned to his community and he tried to do the same thing in his community. And what happened? He was totally unsuccessful in doing so. And then what did he do? He just went to his family and tried to get his family to be more in a state of peace and in this better place. And he was unsuccessful at that too, until finally he turned to himself. And then he was able to have success with the world. So perhaps we can't change the world around us, but if we can work on ourselves and come from this place of humility and do all of this, then that can overflow outward and it can have an effect on the greater community.
I also like the last sentence there, being humble doesn't mean being nobody. It reminds me of the saying, don't hide your light under a bushel basket.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful stuff.
Yeah. It's like, you know, if you have a talent, you also, it's like part of the responsibility of being gifted with that is to use it.
Right, and I included this text here. I absolutely love this poem. I'm not sure if you've come across it before, by Marianne Williamson, that basically says that exact kind of thing, right? Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, handsome, talented, fabulous? But actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We are born to make manifest the glory of God within us. It is not just in some, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we continuously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our fear, our presence automatically liberates others.
Nice. It's like Kenya, he wrote some.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I especially like bringing that to teens because I think that message doesn't always get through as much as it needs to.
I think a lot of that pertains to parenting. Some children are just smothered or controlled to the point where they have no expression of joy or any other emotion. And there are others who just go completely the other way. So there is a balance. And I guess that's the handbook for that wasn't written when I had our first child. But I lived next to a neighbor who every day had a preschooler or something. And it was David's time for 30 minutes. And David could do whatever he wanted, short of jumping off the roof. which he thought about once to put a keeper on it. But I thought that was just so enlightening. You let that child have 30 minutes of just whatever. But so many parents tend to throttle that thing that you just, anyway, that's not funny.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We need that freedom. There's two more texts that kind of go the other way, right? Because we know as human beings, there can be times where all of us, I know certainly I can at times, go toward a place that has some arrogance, right? And to be able to have some balance when that comes up. So the Art Scroll commentary had this quote based on Pirkei Avot: "One who overestimates one's own intellectual abilities is liable to denigrate the dignity and sanctity of the Torah and its teachers and bearers, thus blocking his or her own path toward wisdom. Hence, awe and reverence, born of humility, will protect one from missteps and errors in practical observance and moral judgment."
I've always felt that the real secret of Torah is finding its wisdom. And so things that hold you from finding its wisdom, you can be missing the essence of Torah. It's the wisdom.
So you're saying if you're too arrogant to really be able to dive into it, then you're missing out on its jewels. And there's some other texts that say, if you are too timid to jump in or to ask questions, then you might also be depriving yourself of the opportunity to really learn.
Yes. Yes.
That's why in yeshiva, you're always paired up with somebody. To do it by yourself is challenging, but if you can interact and challenge each other, I think that's a really great way to teach and learn.
Yeah,
like we do every Thursday.
exactly. And that's why I love this group so much, because we can all kind of challenge each other and come from different perspectives. And that's such a blessing. One more text here. Sorry, does someone want to say something?
I just wanted to say, I mean, the Proverbs, from what I am understanding, is kind of all of Proverbs is about the quest for wisdom, kind of, right? That's kind of like what they're writing about a lot, is like unlocking that wisdom, not, being a thinker and going, right? Am I correct in saying that about Proverbs? It's
Solomon wisdom writing. Literature. Yeah.
Yeah. It's about and then sometimes even calls it like a woman, like it's almost like something so you should pursue so much, it's all talking about wisdom. I thought out of Proverbs. So. But yeah, so I love that he just said that too.
So Frank, do you want to read this quote from Proverbs?
I'm not going to do the reading part. I have
okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, no worry. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I apologize.
No, you're okay.
Pride goes before ruin, arrogance before failure. Better to be humble and among the lowly than to share spoils with the proud. So it's really kind of pushing us, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. But it sounds like a very comfortable and invigorating and creative space in the middle and balance. Freedom, as someone said.
I have a little question about that. Taking actual actions into account, it seems to me that being not meek is challenging the actions of others when it's not warranted. So for example, the example of standing in line and somebody ahead of you is taking a lot of time, or the clerk is dawdling with it or something, and you get very agitated and let that start affecting others. That's really not being meek. But on the other hand, there is a time when being too meek is really not right at all. Suppose you see somebody beating a child or leaving a child in a car, locking it up and going into a store. Well, that doesn't seem right. I mean, that seems to me that integrity or wisdom would demand action. If you're not sufficient yourself to challenge that, at least call somebody who is, like the police, because somebody's being mistreated. And so the idea of finding a balance is difficult sometimes. I mean, how involved do you get? How much do you express your own will, as opposed to perhaps overdoing it as a matter of pride, that you're more right than somebody else about a delay in line or some such thing. I don't know. I think there are times when obviously an overreaction causes very great harm. Road rage, for example, or somebody who cuts you off and you're going to show them by cutting them off, leading to a potentially very dangerous situation involving you and many others. So it really is difficult. I think it does take a lot of soul searching ahead of time, because in some of these instances, you don't have a lot of time to think about it. It's going to be a gut reaction, what you do. So you better have thought about it ahead of time.
Right. And that actually is some of the point of Musar, is the idea is that the way that we react in the moment isn't necessarily in line with where our values are. So if we can spend time really, really focusing on these attributes, keeping perhaps a journal based on these attributes, we write down how they're kind of coming up in our lives and really work on them, then slowly our actions and our values will begin to align more. Because none of us are perfect. None of us can do this right all the time. But the thing is, like, by consistently working on it, perhaps we can do better.
You know, what would be really interesting to study in that regard would be that if people kept a journal of situations in which they found they had to think about this, maybe they realized they hadn't thought about it sufficiently ahead of time, those specific instances to look at how they reacted or wish they would have reacted would be very informative.
Yes, and that actually is one of the things that Al Marinis kind of pushes people to do, is to keep that journal, because there are many cases in which people did that for a year or two, and then they noticed the way they reacted in the same situation was very different from how they had reacted a couple years before. And it was because of the work that they had done within themselves that had actually changed that.
You know, I have to admit that sometimes my being angry is because, and maybe you're not as spiritually sick as I could be, but sometimes I think, don't they know who I am? Right? Doesn't the world, don't you know who I am? Like, get out of my way. Like, I have things to do. And it's like that really self-centered thinking that really would get me, you know? And so I think knowing that the world isn't about me is one of the better ways to handle that, because again, I can be sometimes very self-centered if I'm standing in line, because, and again, I'm nobody, but I think, don't these people know who I am? Like, get out of my way. Like, and the same thing on the road. Like, why are you in my left lane? Right. I'm always judging them because they're making me uncomfortable. Right. So I'm like, oh, you are the worst drivers. And then I was saying real quick, is that I think that humility is, for me, like getting this talk is like the day we're born, like, is the day God said the world can't go on without you. But then our whole job here is to learn that the world's not about us or not about me. And that's what I was just getting at as people were talking. So.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. And that's a quote by Nachman of Bratslav, right? Who said the day you were born is the day that God decided the world couldn't exist without you. And, right, and to kind of unlearn that. Go ahead,
comment on Jim's words and how different they are, how we apply that differently from when, of course, I'm old enough to say this, when I was a boy growing up in Brooklyn to my community today. In my area, my street where I lived on was akin to a village, and every parent looked after every child, and you couldn't get away with anything without it being noticed. And the worst thing they could say is, if you don't straighten up, or if you stop, they don't stop that, I'm going to tell your mom or your dad, and then you would know that you. But it also worked with adults as well, and it even went to paddling somebody or spanking. If you even try to separate somebody today from a child who's being abused, you're going to jail. So the culture has changed, and while you have the instinct to do the right thing, you may be curtailed by the way we live today. I don't know how to get around that.
I think
There's no
another
easy answers. Yeah, go ahead, Rabbi Catherine.
I think that another way to think about Musar, because it does focus on a quality, in this case, we're using a per parsha, is when you look at yourself and what you do is like, ew, I'd like to change this, but it also invites you to say, how could I do this differently the next time? You know, what do I need to change? As it invites it in a very supportive way. The point is not to castigate yourself for doing badly, but to learn how to do things a different way. Or maybe you have to try a whole lot of different ways.
Does anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak, does anyone have anything that they'd like to bring in? Okay, well, I'm going to bring us to this one text here that I think most of us might have heard before, and if not, well, now's the first time. And this is a text based on something from the Talmud, actually, where Rabbi Bunham taught every person should have two pockets. Of course, they didn't know women's clothing when they wrote this. Every woman should have two pockets, and one pocket should be a piece of paper saying, "I am but dust and ashes." When one is feeling too proud, reach into this pocket and take out the paper and read it. In the other pocket should be a piece of paper saying, "For my sake, the world was created." When one is feeling disheartened and lowly, reach into this pocket and take this paper out and read it. We are each the joining of two worlds. We are fashioned from clay, but our spirit is the breath of Adonai. Are you trying to unmute? Okay. Yeah, so there's this really powerful kind of idea of finding that balance, because at different points in our life, we might feel like we really need the line, "For my sake, the world was created." We might really need to be uplifted because we are having a hard time and we're down on ourselves. And at other points, we might have this kind of feeling where we lose sight of ourselves and allow our arrogance to get in the way. And at this moment, we might need to read, "I am but dust and ashes," to remind ourselves that we are a small part in something much bigger.
I like that it's a little piece of paper, and after you've taken out the one that works for you today, you don't throw it away, you don't crumble it up, you put it back in your pocket. There's such a beautiful continuity to that our life is not a straight line at all.
And you just know those notes are there, balancing each other out. So all of this seems to be kind of playing with the idea of humility and our sense of self. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on the relationship between self-esteem and humility, now that we've read all these different kind of perspectives and texts.
Wow. Wow.
I would say that to me, it seems that self-esteem and humility are very close, because when you are humble, you know within yourself that you have that self-esteem to be humble.
That kind of support each other.
Can you say more about that, Rabbi Catherine?
Well, I would say, let's see, it is, I have trouble remembering things. Okay, so we have humility and then we have self-esteem. So if you have no self-esteem, that is a really, really difficult place to be in, because unless that's always been your life, in which case, then we're looking at a different picture. So I'm thinking that if you're only humble, that's okay, someone else can do it. I mean, if you adapt that, you need to have both things. You need to know when that you are in the presence of a master, that you are in the presence of somebody with more knowledge, or you don't know how to handle this particular presence or challenge that's been given to you. It's like, it may have come to you because of your self-esteem and the way you present yourself, but the reality might be that you're really not sure what to do. And where do you find that balance of offering the help, but getting the help you need to offer the help? It's like, don't pretend to be an expert where you aren't. You know, but when there is that opportunity and you do have that wisdom or experience or training, to use that in a way that includes other people, that makes it accessible.
I think self-esteem means that you have confidence in your abilities and you have respect yourself. You have self-respect. So if you have those, it seems like your humility would be in check because you have a good sense of who you are. You know, telling a kid good job 6,000 times a day doesn't give them self-esteem. Making their bed gives them self-esteem. Having a chore that they do makes, you know, them have self-esteem. So I think that when your self-esteem is well established and you're feeling good about yourself, I think that humility probably might be in check, or not for that very situation have to be looked at differently.
So it's really interesting. Are we then saying that arrogance is actually a source of a lack of self-esteem?
I think arrogance is self-esteem taken way farther than it should have been.
And actually, I think that arrogance is from a lack of self-esteem, because you lash out at other people when you don't feel confident in yourself, and then you make somebody else the whipping board of that. Yeah, so.
Arrogance is fear. It's fear at its times 10, and that's what you have. It's people don't want to get hurt, or that's what I know. People that don't want to get hurt, so they're arrogant towards everyone, and they're the best, and it's all because of fear. Fear. They don't feel, they feel inadequate somewhere. You know, that's what I've always known. So, and that's when I have good self-esteem. I don't need my ego, right? I can have just good self-esteem. Anyway, that's what I got.
Thanks. Yeah, Tom.
No, I was going to say, I think, you know, it's a really fascinating, you know, kind of idea, but I think it's also kind of flexible. I think it's, everybody doesn't speak the same way to each person. And you know, you take from it, but it works inversely. So it's really interesting how, if you're having issues with self-esteem or arrogance or different combination, it still speaks to you, that saying, you know, and it still kind of brings you to a balance. So I just would say, I think people have different, you know, different needs as it comes to that, and it speaks to it's flexible.
Absolutely. I don't think it's one case fits all. And very clearly, our teachers say that, right? That all of us have different points where we are. Things show up for us depending on so many different factors. And that's why, like, this work of Musar is so incredibly personal, because for every single one of us, it brings up different things. So yeah, thank you for contextualizing that for us, Tom. There were a couple of other texts. I just want to bring us back to this for just a minute or two, and then we can go back to our discussion without these texts on the screen. There were a couple of particular things that this commentary that Michelle Perlman and Rabbi Michelle Perlman and Rabbi Sharon Mars brought in response first to Adam and Eve eating from the tree of knowledge, and second, from Cain killing Abel. And so if we look at the text of Genesis 3, 6 to 10, it says, like, When the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, she took a fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband, and he ate. And then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they perceived that they were naked, and they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths. They heard the sound of the eternal God moving about the garden in the breezy time of day, and the man and wife hid from the eternal God among the trees of the garden. And God called out to the man and said, "Where are you?" Ayika is the Hebrew word. And he replied, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And the commentary to these verses I thought was really fascinating. Does anyone want to read this section here from In Our Lives?
I will.
Thank you so much.
In our own lives, we hide our authentic selves from the truth of our lives. When we live out of balance, despite the fact that we may be falling apart on the inside or on the outside, we betray our lives. We take up either too much or too little space. Either we take away space from others or we abandon them when they need us. Our sacred connection to anything important, our families, our communities, and our work, all suffer when we neglect to live life with balance. Celebrated with an intention, Shabbat provides the time, space, and opportunity to reconnect to our core essence, reacquire a sense of proportion, and connect anew with the people and projects in our lives with both humility and presence. Anavah, approaching our lives with humility, means not taking up too much space in the garden, not trying to fool others with some disguise of our true selves, but to honestly offer our truest selves to the people and work we encounter in our lives.
And what a powerful metaphor, our nakedness, right? Like they were afraid because they were naked. They came to realize the world as it was and had to stand before God. And God says, where are you in doing that? Having the humility to do that, how scary is it?
I like that connection about when we're in balance, we don't take up too much space in the garden. That is really, really powerful. We don't take up too much space. We're not a zero, but we're not a giant. Because the garden is the world. I love that last sentence.
Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
I'm sorry I came late because of other appointments and stuff, but I don't know if it's been said, but I think we all might agree with what I'm going to say, where it says here, Shabbat provides the time, space, and opportunity to reconnect. I believe that every day provides not just Shabbat, but all the time, as much as we can, to treat other people with respect and kindness and so on and so forth. Although for sure, Shabbat does provide that time. I mean, it's all the time. It should
right,
be.
we can choose all the time. And the idea is that if we do it on Shabbat, perhaps it'll spill over into our other days as well. I think that's what they're getting at. But your perspective is like, of course, you can make that time every day if you choose to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I'm just going to bring in this one other text too, because they also focus, if you remember, on the story of Cain and Abel and how Cain and Abel both brought offerings to God, and God accepted Abel's offering, but did not accept Cain. And Cain was distressed. He was really, really upset. And God calls out and says, "Why are you distressed? Why is your face fallen?" And God says, "Surely if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do right, sin couches at the door. Its urge is toward you, yet you can be its master." Those words themselves are really fascinating and powerful. But then the story goes on, and Cain says to his brother Abel, and they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him. And the Eternal said to Cain, "Where is your brother?" And he said, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And so at this moment, he's being disingenuous, and he's also being kind of arrogant in this moment. There isn't a whole lot of humility that's going on within this story in any way. So I just want to bring in this other text that kind of shows up within the commentary. Would anyone like to read these words?
I can.
Thanks, Irv.
Cain could use a good dose of Anavah. Blinded by his sense of deserving God's reward, an abundance of arrogance, Cain resorts to violence. Rather than taking a step back, Cain chooses an irreversible course. Rather than humbly stepping into his proper space and making room for his brother, he does the radical opposite. Tragically, he forgets the words that God spoke to him just 2 verses prior to the murder. If you do not do well, sin a demon at the door. You're the one who it craves, and you can govern it. In both Cain's and Adam's cases, an attempt to hide the core essence of a person causes a great distance in the human-divine relationship. Insecurity need not necessarily become negatively manifested if we take care of the emotions by becoming more skilled at thoroughly evaluating and strategically expressing them. When we leave pain unexpressed, jealousy can turn to anger, and as a result, we might become dangerous to others. When we are faced with challenging circumstances, we ought to ask ourselves, where are you? Where are the others? Cultivating the Meda of Anavah might support us in finding our soul's rightful place.
Any thoughts or comments on any of these?
Yeah, I have a thought now. Reading that advice and what God told Cain beforehand, what should Cain have done if you put yourself in Cain's place? Here you feel rejected. You feel you have an offer as good as your brother's, yet it's totally ignored. Now, what should he have done rather than succumbing to the anger and the jealousy and lashing out and punishing something he thought deserved something that should have come in his direction? If you want to close the loop on this, what is it that Cain should have done? And think about it as if you are Cain and this has just happened to you. Now, how would you apply this advice? And you even know how it comes out. So you don't want to have it come out the way it came out for Cain. So how would you use this advice? What would you do in Cain's shoes?
It's a great question. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think one approach might be is to find out why I was rejected. Where did I disappoint you? How can I improve? Where did I let you down? I don't know it. Otherwise, I would have corrected it in advance. And if you're on the other side, I did not accept your gift, your offering, because that was left out. God's explanation is not there. So he's left to anger if both those elements are not there. And in life, that happens a lot.
So you're saying come at it from a place of more humility.
That's a good way to put it.
Would it have been Cain's place to ask God why his offering had not been accepted?
Yes.
Good, yeah.
Yes.
I would say that Cain, if we there's another question there, but I would say that if I was Cain, I would know that if I know that I'm doing the best that I can, if those are the best offerings I can give and they're not good enough, then I'm just going to keep doing it until one day that my best is what God wants. And that right now, God wants Abel's. Like, that's just the fact. And if I can accept that Abel's are just better, mine ain't that good yet, or maybe tomorrow God will like mine better. So let me just keep doing what God has, because I'm only doing the best that I can with what he's given me. So if I'm doing that, then I'm cool. Like I'm trying, and that's what I would do. Did not have to go kill my brother. Sorry, I love you.
I think
I find that's a really difficult question that Jim asked, because when I think about Cain and Abel, I think of them as young men. I don't think of them as someone who's lived life for a long time. And I think of Cain as having a very quick temper. That he, not only does he have a quick temper, but it almost sounds like Abel's been the favored son or the favorite child for a while, or he perceives Abel has been the one, and he just ignites. And when you have a flash temper, it is very, very difficult to control that. I don't know what I would have done if I were in his place and I were that angry, and if I felt that neglected. It's just a fabulous question, because we're invited to think about what we would do, but in the moment, particularly for me when I was younger, it was really bad, is you just ignite, and then you're sorry, and then it's too late.
I think there's another thing in here that I think it was mentioned in the advice, that if you have a situation like this and you don't, oh gosh, I almost forgot what was going on here. Another senior moment, huh? You don't satisfy your own craving for the answer as to why yours was not acceptable or not as good. It's similar to people I've come across that take offense at something and they don't express anything about it, but it festers. It festers in their mind and they get angry about it. And sometimes it builds up to where I've had it that a person absolutely hates me for something I did 4 years ago and interprets every interaction I've had with them since that time in that light. And it snowballs to them actually hating me, when the slight in the first place could have easily been dispelled with a simple explanation or an apology, had it been known to be an offense, had I known it was an offense. But when you mention flash temper, I think also, what about Aaron's sons and the offering in the tabernacle that God rejected, and he killed them? He wiped them out. Now, in that case, perhaps it would seem that God has a flash temper. In that case, there was no ability to take the action back, that the sons maybe were not meek enough in thinking about ahead of time. Once again, people need to think about this in advance, so that in the spur of the moment, they don't take an action that is ultimately very regrettable.
And to what Jim has said, I mean, it says right here, psychiatrists, psychologists' offices are full of people. When we leave pain unexpressed, jealousy can turn to anger, and as a result, we might become dangerous to others. And, it's all about getting that out, communicating, and going back to, what Frank said, fear. A lot of stuff is fear driven, and you express, you interpret things the way you're feeling, and it may not always be the right, the thing the person was expressing to you, and you just misconstrue it because of your thinking, and all these unexpressed emotions. And I think we all fight with that. I think we all have really good intentions, and we have, we're not perfect. So I think it's a battle all the time in every situation to balance out your behavior and to change it when you can, when you've gone a direction you don't really like that you've gone. I think it's all part of living and part of being human beings. A friend once said, you can't take the human out of human beings. And I think that's really true, that we all struggle. Nobody is perfect. And I think we all struggle trying to find that balance.
Yeah, I think that I know it's something that I have focused on, especially in the last few years, which is, how do I recognize when I'm really getting my tail in a knot or I'm really getting angry? How do I teach myself to A, recognize that, and B, step back. I mean, I think that's particularly important in COVID when there's so much pressure that it has become easier just to say, ah, to heck with it, you know, but to say, what can I do differently? Do I need to just step back from this conversation? Do I need to find a way to walk out of the room? Do I need to take another breath? Do I need to wait before I write that letter, make that call, have that appointment? That because of how I feel about whatever the issue is at hand, is I'm likely to rue what I say unless I really think about it.
There was one lesson taught in some training I had is if you're really angry and you write that letter, put it in your drawer for a few days and then pull it out and look at it again. Now it's emails, of course, and it's a little quicker. A little
Yeah.
and
emails are fast, unfortunately. So
Can I add something? Cain is upset. God tells him, you didn't do something that's right. Now, should God be explicit, or should Cain just start conjuring up what did he do that was wrong? So there are midrashes that talk about that. He did not really give his best foot forward to God. He gave the fallen fruit. So the question is, God is displeased. He tells Cain he's displeased, and he tells Cain, think about what you've done. Think about, did you really give me what you wanted to, and what was the best thing? Cain didn't want to do that. So he goes off in anger.
Yeah, that's one of the kind of rabbinic ways of looking at it. And again, it goes back to this idea of humility, of how can we approach something with humility and take a step back? And that is something that is so incredibly difficult to do. For the past, Marla, what was it, 4 years? Marla has been ending each of our Torah studies with a beautiful blessing by Rabbi Lewert. Actually, I have the book right here. This beautiful book by Cheryl Lewert. And as we're starting this new tradition of going through the Torah with the Musar commentary, as we will be for this year, I thought maybe this is an opportunity to end in a slightly different way, because it's good to mix things up every so often. So I thought at the end of each chapter, you'll notice that there are some questions for deeper thought. So I just want to highlight them as we prepare to leave Torah study today. Just asking ourselves, perhaps this upcoming Shabbat, perhaps, Michael, we could do it today, right? Every day is an opportunity. Where am I in my most important relationships? How much space do I take up? How might I tend to my most sacred relationships on Shabbat? What relationships have I been paying too much attention to, and for whom have I not been present? How might I make time to feel and deal with my emotions before Shabbat arrives or on Shabbat itself? How can Anavah help me to understand the place of emotion in my life? And how much space do I give myself to feel strong emotions? Perhaps an invitation for us to kind of grapple with some of these questions in hopes that by doing this work of Musar, we'll find ourselves a little bit more aligned. So I just want to thank you all so much for all of your really insightful comments and thoughts and questions. And I look forward to studying the Torah next week with all of you as we go into Parashat Noach. Thank you.
Thank you.
One quick comment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Rabbi, I was so pleased to be at the Sukkah service and to see people in person and to observe a wonderful, wonderful Sukkah and service. Thank you so much for it.
It was so good to finally see you in person. Yeah, hopefully there'll be many, many more opportunities for all of us to see one another. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you for letting me join.
Shalom.
How was that?